We are trying to create an environment that someone who doesn't hunt, or someone who does hunt but doesn't feel like that the industry best represents who they are as a person and as a hunter, feels comfortable entering into this conversation in a new way.
Not all of your viewers are subscribing to your content. And so when they see a picture of a grip and grin, all they see is a bloodthirsty human.
Something that I would hope is that people realize that those are wild animals and they have savage natures. And I think that we've done a lot of animals a disservice by personifying them or characterizing them.
I think there needs to be some sort of a paradigm shift. You can experience what it's like to take the life of an animal that you're about to consume and then have to prepare it and process it yourself. There's a responsibility that each of us carries to ensure that this topic of hunting and land and access is not something that gets written about in history books, but is something that continues to thrive for generations. This is Brad Neathery with Modern Huntsman.
And this is Tyler Sharp, also with Modern Huntsman, and you are listening to Living Country in the City.
Y'all ready for your dose of flyover state spirit? Straight from the concrete jungle? Well, put down your latte and pull on your boots. It's time for Living Country in the City.
Hey y'all, welcome to episode 90 of Living Country in the City. Before we get started, I want to say a huge thank you to Sawyer Products for their continual support of the podcast. I really could not do what I do here at Living Country in the City without their support or without their gear. I have been using Sawyer products religiously on all my hunts throughout this past year, whether that's their water filtration, insect repellent, first aid, or the sunscreen. You really can't go wrong with Sawyer products. They have been doing this for over 30 years. Their gear is tested and it is absolutely bulletproof. So make sure y'all check them out at Sawyer.com. All right, y'all, rounding out this January, I have another really awesome episode with y'all. I have actually been trying to link up with these guys for over a year at this point, and we just have not been able to get our schedules to match. Well, finally, I was able to get Mr. Tyler Sharp and Brad Neathery of Modern Huntsman on the line. You guys, if you haven't checked out this publication, it is absolutely incredible. It's doing amazing things for the public image of hunting. So I hope you all enjoy this episode. All right, y'all, welcome to episode 90 of Living Country in the City. Today, we're talking with Brad Neathery and Tyler Sharp of Modern Huntsman. Guys, thank you so much for hopping on today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome. So I always like to start out with just a little bit of background about yourselves. How did each of you, maybe kind of the elevator pitch version of how you guys got your starts in hunting?
Well, I'll kick it off. This is Brad. So my story 5 years ago, and I always want to qualify, I'm not the expert hunter. I'm not the guy that you turn to get lessons or to try and really help you understand and dissect this whole thing. I'm somebody who is still soaking in so much that this industry has to offer, from experts and conservationists and philanthropists in the industry who have been in this far longer than I have. But from a very early age, my dad and I would go shoot guns just to be together as father and son, and then maybe once a year we'd go and dove hunt out on a family ranch. But it was really more time that we could be together than it was a way to go out and go hunting. So if you ever asked me, in my younger years, if I was a hunter, I'd say no, and I wouldn't even want to associate with hunters. I had kind of a less than desirable perception of what the hunter looked like, and there was a stigma in my mind of what a hunter looked like. And anytime I say that, I get two responses. The first response is people nodding their head going, yep, I totally get that. And the other response is, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you mean. And the two camps don't really coexist, or they haven't historically. And so really the reason in founding Modern Huntsman was a way to bridge those two camps together and help them to see each other's side in a different perspective. And hopefully, so that we can get to a point in society where those two bodies of people don't look as different and as odd to each other as they do today.
Awesome. So how'd you get your start in hunting?
Sure. So I grew up in Texas, and didn't hunt a lot when I was a kid. I mean, I certainly did. I spent a lot of time outdoors. It's more one of those things where I was hunting but didn't know I was hunting, right? If I was always tracking wildlife and trying to catch reptiles and, find animals and all that kind of stuff. And then it really wasn't until, so I went to a film school out in Los Angeles. I went to USC, and then upon graduation, I actually moved to Tanzania and sort of got immersed in the African, safari outdoor adventure hunting scene. And that's kind of when I really got started, and lived in the bush for 5 months and really got a pretty thorough education on what it's like to be in the middle of nowhere and survive off of meat that's hunted. And then coming back to Dallas, was sort of re-immersed into that world and started to just turn that into a career. But for me, being in that environment in the traditional hunting industry, and then I've been a freelance writer, photographer, filmmaker in that industry for probably 11 years now, I started to see some patterns on the hunting side. It was usually a room full of members of the same club, all agreeing with each other. And when the conversation about hunting left the room and engaged with non-hunters, it ceased to be productive. And then on the other side, when I would come back from some of these adventures overseas and that sort of thing, the reaction that I got from people who in most cases didn't know how hunting worked or how it played a role in conservation, and that their opinions of those matters were based off of things they had read online or things they'd seen on Facebook, and often were misinformed. And so a lot of the work I did sort of surrounded this theme of a lack of communication between hunters and non-hunters, but then also a lot of misinformation surrounding those topics. And so that was a theme that I was exploring a lot in my own work. And over the years, I just started to try to figure out how to put a name to it or what it was going to be. And I never really knew. And that's kind of how Brad and I met, was in that context. And it just happened to be the right time. And we, sort of connected over through Instagram and started to kind of piece the concept of Modern Huntsman together.
So it definitely sounds like the two of you were working parallel paths, kind of in that same mindset, and you just, like you said, you just kind of happened upon each other at the right time.
So it's pretty interesting because, we were coming from very different backgrounds in the industry, where I was a non-hunter kind of, warmly walking into this industry and having a curiosity for what it provided, because I'd been exposed to, at this time, I'd kind of been exposed to new creatives in the space and brands and organizations who I thought were doing a really great job at presenting hunting in a way that formerly the general mass media and also kind of the grip and grin hunting media had really overconsumed the way that I had been exposed to hunting. And now I'm being introduced to these people who have a totally different philosophy and they present themselves differently. And for the first time, me as a meat eater and never wanting to call myself a hunter could understand why people would be really proud to represent that they're hunters. And so in light of that, wanting to start some sort of an outlet that could be a pedestal for these creatives and the brands and the organizations that were doing a really great job at their presentation, but didn't really have a collective outlet to come together and spread their voice. I wanted to create that, but didn't really have the know-how inside the space to make the voice not only inspiring and convicting, but to also be hyper relevant and full of real education that really would transcend beyond just kind of the inspiration and warm fuzzy space. But we could also talk about topics like conservation and ecology and talk on heavy topics like the topics in Africa and grizzly bears and wolves and all that goes into that. And so about that same time, I'd been introduced to Tyler through a friend who he didn't tell me where he lived or any information. He just said, hey, I've got a buddy who really shares a lot of these same philosophies, and I feel like you guys would get along great, and who knows, maybe maybe he could like contribute to the magazine in some form, or maybe y'all could, work together in some capacity. So I reached out to Tyler via Instagram, and I thought that he for sure lived in Africa or Montana or somewhere, right, or Scotland. And so I reached out to Tyler and just wanted to have a phone call with him. And he said, where are you guys based? I was like, well, me, are based in Dallas, Texas. And he was like, no way, that's where I am. And so we were able to meet up over coffee and start kind of having this really unique conversation of both of us having the exact same vision, the exact same ideology of what we wanted to create, but coming from two very different backgrounds and reasons for wanting to create this. So met Tyler and had this conversation, and then I think his perspective on kind of the rest of this is better than mine, so I'll let him pick it up from here.
Yeah, it was very serendipitous because, when I saw Modern Huntsman pop up on Instagram, I thought for sure these guys are in Bozeman or they're in Denver or Seattle or something. And it turns out we were both in Dallas, Texas. And so we met up over coffee, and as Brad said, he kind of started to unfold, what his vision was and kind of what he wanted to do. But there were certain parts of it that weren't as clear, and he wasn't sure which direction he wanted to go. And I apologize in advance to your listeners if anyone's heard us say this before, but I feel like this is a quote that just needs to go on T-shirts or something. But Brad and I kind of said, hey, I know this is going to sound weird because we just met, but what you're describing is probably going to be my life's work, and you need to just hire me as your creative director right now. And he was like, okay, well, maybe we finish this coffee and, we keep talking about it. And so anyways, it was just kind of one of those worlds colliding situations. And, Brad and I do have similar creative backgrounds in terms of our skill sets, but they're different enough that it offers us variety. He is much more experienced in, the branding and marketing side of things. And then I have a lot more experience in the actual content production and filmmaking and photography. And, but then combining that together, we kind of have a complete package in terms of, being able to produce, strategize and distribute media. And so that's kind of where it started. And, we have another business partner named Elliot who helps us on the logistics and management side and making sure that this is the ship is staying afloat. And then my girlfriend, Katie Smith, is our designer. So she makes the publication look beautiful. And so we kind of just, I know that I was a total pain in the beginning just because of what I had experienced in the hunting industry. And I know that there's a lot of conflict and disagreement and, lines being drawn in the sand of, are you a bow hunter or a rifle hunter? Are you traditional or compound? Do you wear camo or solid colors? There's all this sort of dissension. And then on top of that, the opposition and criticism that comes from outside of the hunting world, from people who don't understand how it works, or they have a negative perception. And in most cases, that's not based on actual experience. That's based on, a stereotype or a news headline they see, or just a general right versus left kind of thing. And so we had to kind of lay out this roadmap of, okay, if we're going to do this thing, these are all of the things we have to look out for. And, in the very beginning, we had to be very strategic with, the things we're saying, the people we're involving, the photos we're putting out there. And so it kind of led to this path of deciding that we wanted to produce a book. And you call it a magazine, you call it a publication, but our first one was a 204-page book, and we did a Kickstarter, raised $100,000, and produced these things ourselves without any advertising or sponsors. And really, I knew in my mind that it was needed in terms of a missing link in the hunting industry, but also in the communication gap between a hunting and a non-hunting world. And Brad saw the opportunity of a new media opportunity. And for us, he had come from a non-hunting background and saw a situation where there was all this amazing work, people who were creating very thoughtful, artistic, and respectful work surrounding hunting, but no one was concentrating that into a central outlet or media forum. And so that's kind of the strategy we had here. One, it was from a media side, it was from communication side, and then, in terms of the publication, actually putting this down on paper and sort of concentrating the voice and the vision. And we managed to do that, and we've sold I think, over 8,000 copies of Volume 1 since February. And then we just released Volume 2, which is themed around public lands, in October. And according to Brad yesterday, we've sold almost 4,000 of Volume 2 in less than 2 months.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable. We had no idea it was going to take off like that.
Yeah, I've got to say, I remember when I hopped on, we started talking, I think right before the release of Volume 1, I want to say, is when we started chatting, probably a little bit before this time last year. And I remember when I finally got Volume 1, I got it in the mail, and I'm like, holy crap, I thought this was going to be a magazine. Like, I'm like, this is it's one of those funny things where I remember I opened it up and I looked at it, I was like, oh man, and like it sounds kind of ridiculous, but like I almost had this like little bit of reverence when I opened it up and like looked through it the first time. It was like I almost treated it like a coffee table book. Where you have it out nice, and when you do go through it, you're very careful with everything, and so I gotta say it was definitely a work of art in and of itself, and it was really, really cool to get that first one, and Volume 2 is definitely on the Christmas list. I'm holding off purchasing because I get in trouble if I buy anything this close to Christmas.
I know what you mean.
I'm a 35-year-old man, and my mother still gets on my case if I buy anything close to Christmas. Well,
thank you for that. It's that's something that we had talked to our European counterparts, our UK counterparts, the Pace brothers, who have been heavily involved in Modern Huntsman since really day one, and they are our exclusive distribution partner in the UK. And one thing that they were talking about when they were kind of part of the early Kickstarter days and had us on their podcast before we had released Volume 1, and they caught the vision but really didn't know what to expect from the outcome. And so we were on an interview with them, I guess, 3 or 4 months after we launched Volume 1, and they're like, same thing. We just, we believed in you guys, and we loved the vision, and didn't really know what it was going to turn into. But then we saw Volume 1, and it was like, oh, they did it. They actually did it. And it's just rewarding to hear things like that, because we wanted to set the expectation, somewhat low, not too low, but there's really no word or phrase or term that really describes what this type of a book is. It's unique in and of itself. And
we need to come up with a new term.
Yeah. So to be able to kind of hear people's responses and how it impacted them in their own unique ways is really, really fun to hear.
I feel like you guys could release like a limited edition set or something that are actual coffee table books with a hardcover and everything, because I would kill to have those things out.
We've certainly talked about it,
but I think you guys talked a little bit about it, where we're at an interesting point. I'm also obviously super new to hunting and learning about all of this, but just looking across kind of the history of everything and where it used to be, where it is now, and it's at an interesting place in history, I feel like, right now, because of the technology we have, because of really everyone's ability to have a voice across, that's heard across the world. That's something that, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago really wasn't as much of a thing. I guess not 10 years ago at this point. I still think the 90s were 10 years ago, but but 20, 30 years ago, it really wasn't a thing. People didn't have this ability to, in an instant, put out a message that's seen around the world, and it's a very powerful thing, but it's a very dangerous thing. And I think we're seeing a big shift, a big kind of polarizing shift. You have two camps, or you have one side that is trying to take this responsible approach of outreach, and like yourselves, you're doing one with the magazine, but also just with everything else. There's a whole group of people that focus on outreach and wanting to present hunting in a responsible way, and are focused on the longevity of it and the growth and sharing what is amazing about it. And then to some extent, there's also the group that's like, screw them all. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna post as many bloody animals as I want, and this and that, and I see to some extent both sides. I want to be able to, if I shoot a deer, I want to be able to post a, for lack of a better term, grip and grin or whatever it is, but there's more considerations to that, and the audiences have changed. It's not the time where you have to order a VHS tape to be able to see this stuff. Audiences have changed, and so it's important how we present that. And it's cool to see you guys being part of that charge, if you will.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, that if we were to boil down what the value of Modern Huntsman is, or what it is that we're trying to really establish in the industry, it's the tone, right? We're trying to reset the tone of the industry. And, there's nothing objective that I think hunters are, the ones who are doing best case scenario, they're conservation minded. They only take their allotted amount, who are true ethical hunters. Nothing objective that I think most people would disagree with. Most people who are meat eaters or carnivorous would disagree with. It's the way that they present themselves. It's the tone that's used. And the thing that the people who, like me 6 years ago, who would have kind of said, I don't want to be represented as that, it was the fact that, exactly like you're saying, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you had to subscribe to something to be witness to hunting content. You had to buy the VHS, or you had to subscribe to Field and Stream, or you had to have a buddy who was a hunter, and he'd show you the pictures of his whitetail that he got, that he kept in his billfold. He'd show you around the water cooler that day. You had to somehow subscribe and submit to witnessing that content, and you could have some context behind it. Nowadays, with the rise of social media, it's fantastic that we all have a voice and we all have a vote on something. But one thing that many hunters forget is that not all of your viewers are subscribing to your content. Some people are coming at it cold turkey, and they had a bad experience, or they've had a wrongful perception. And so when they see a picture of a grip and grin, all they see is a greedy, bloodthirsty human who gets some sort of a rise out of killing animals, and has bypassed 17 grocery stores where they could have bought meat that's already dead and instead chose to go take another life, right? There's no context. There's no subscription to that train of thought. And while I fundamentally believe that hunters should be proactive on these public platforms that we have in front of us, like social media, we need to rethink the way that our tone is presented, because some people don't have the same train of thought. They don't have the context. They don't have the ability to unsubscribe to that. And so they're only given one snapshot, and that snapshot is going to determine a lot for them, especially if it's one snapshot times 30,000 hunters who, communicate the exact same way.
I've had this conversation a lot offline with a few people. I've I've talked a lot with a guy, Brad Luttrell. I've had him on the podcast before too. He runs the Go Wild app, and we've talked a lot about, you know, your audience. And, you know, it's one, like you said, it's one thing if you've got a private audience of people who you know are a supportive community, then you know what? Yeah, throw up that shot that may not be the most refined and, you know, cleaned up, whatever, if it's being shared with a group of close friends or hunters who you know are going to understand the story behind that. But when you don't know who your audience is going to be, we all have a responsibility as hunters to protect what we have, because it's not, it can disappear. You know, as a guy living in California, I know far too well how quickly our ability to hunt can disappear, and so I see it getting whittled away bit by bit.
Yeah.
Well, something to take into account here. You know, we always talk about the quote old guard of the hunting industry, and some of these, you know, the voiceover you did earlier about, oh, well, we don't care, we're going to do whatever we want. And unfortunately, there is this sort of, I'm going to go down with the ship mentality. And a lot of times it's typically older generation who have not, they didn't really see the transition from the way it used to be to the way it is now. And it doesn't matter if you don't like the fact that people are opposed to traditional bloody grip and grin photos. That's a reality. And we live in a world where if you post a photo online, not only can that information be shared all over the world, but there are people and organizations out there that are specifically looking for content to slander hunting and to use that as fodder to derail, you know, the perception of hunting. And we can all agree that hunting has a bad rap right now. It's a bad reputation. And whether that's through the actions of individuals who are disrespectful or we feel don't best represent our demographic, or it is through misinformation from other organizations with you know, harmful intent, that's the reality. And so you can either accept that reality that you are responsible for your own actions, and that if you don't care and you are continuing to recklessly post things with no context or no explanation, you are having negative, you know, there are negative consequences to that for the rest of us. And so I think you just have to be aware of your environment and know that, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't share trophy photos with your friends and family, but perhaps know your audience there and the context, and that your actions have, you know, consequences. And so, you know, you can either be a part of the problem or a way to, you know, be a part of the solution. And that's kind of what we're attempting to do here, is that hunting has a PR problem, and we have intentionally removed ourselves from the traditional debate, the us versus them, this, what in my opinion has kind of become a childlike mud throwing competition, and have circumnavigated that to a different forum where emotions are not on high and defenses are not up, and we're trying to create a situation where constructive conversations can happen. And through messaging and tone, we are trying to create an environment that someone who doesn't hunt, or who's interested in hunting, or someone who does hunt but doesn't feel like that the industry best represents who they are as a person and as a hunter, feels comfortable entering into this conversation in a new way. And you know, our intention is literally to be the light at the end of a very dark PR tunnel for hunting. And I think that it's working, and I think we are getting recognized for that. And not everyone sees it, right? There are very much these I'm going to go down with the ship mentality people who see that and they're like, oh, you guys are apologetic hunters and you're bowing to the left. And no, that's not true. And I use this metaphor in the same way that, you know, that your wife, you know, you could talk to her and you could either say you want to make love or you want to screw. And the difference in tone there depends on, you know, the way that that's accepted. And in the same way with hunting, you know, using the word kill versus using the word harvest or gather, is just a matter of respect. And so it's more about the way that you're using your words and showing respect towards the subject matter. And I think that the fact that an audience can perceive that we are presenting this content with respectful intent is making a difference. And some companies are organizing that, or I'm sorry, they're recognizing that. And we're hoping that over time that will trickle down into the industry, and that will become, a little bit more of a standard, so that, and it's not for us about converting a ton of people to become hunters. It's more about the 70 to 80% of the population in the United States who doesn't hunt. We are hoping to improve their perception of hunting so that they view it in a little bit more of a fair light. So if a vote comes up, or if a conversation starts, that they're going to be a little bit more informed, and that they're going to be basing their decision on facts, on actual people, on what we feel to be our ethical approaches to hunting, so that they may say, you know what, I'm actually okay with it this way. I'm not okay with that way, which is this sensationalized Facebook post. I'm okay with it being like this. This is more respectful and sensible. And through presenting it in that way, we're hoping to show people, okay, there's more than just what you see online. There's this whole other world for people who live quiet lives and don't shout it from the rooftops. Please take that into consideration before you pick up your pitchfork.
And to that end, it's been really cool because we've had more emails and Instagram messages and Facebook messages from people who are vegans, or who are who have kind of toyed around with the idea of veganism, or a group that would historically be fundamentally opposed to this. And they have said, I won't necessarily change my lifestyle and my habits. However, I'm not going to continue sharing along or passing along these, negative, horrible rants about what hunters are, because I've been introduced to, a different way of thinking about it. And man, that is the most excellent form of success we could ever imagine, because like Tyler said, a lot of these topics and these issues are coming to a vote. I mean, we're seeing right in front of us pieces of public land that has been designated for the American people by conservationists and preservationists, that this is becoming, that's being stripped away from us, with or without our vote. And most people don't really have a full understanding of the societal impact of that. And mostly because hunters are the ones who have the greatest interest in those particular topics, and they're the ones who are fighting to keep this thing around. And if hunters are the ones who are on the outside and the ones who are ostracized from society, then nobody will take them seriously. And so to the people who are that kind of, like Tyler said, the old guard hunter who has that complex of, I'm going down with the ship, and, I'm going to put out whatever I say, and it doesn't matter what people think. Well, there's a generation of people behind you who are going to be impacted by that. And there's a responsibility that each of us carries to ensure that this topic of hunting and land and access is not something that gets written about in history books, but it's something that continues to thrive for generations.
Absolutely. On that note, we're going to pause for just a second, hear a word from one of my partners.
All right, y'all, we all know that it's possible to get into the backcountry and take that big buck or bull with a set of surplus store camo and a Walmart tent. But let's face it, quality gear can often make the difference between checking out early due to sheer misery and pushing through just a little bit further to find success. But all this gear can start to add up, and that's why I'd recommend shopping at Black Ovis. They carry high-performance hunting gear from all the top brands like Vortex, Crispy, Sitka, First Light, Mountain Ops, and Stone Glacier, often at a nicely discounted rate. I've yet to find anywhere that offers a more reasonable price, plus their shipping is free and their customer service is unmatched. Additionally, by making the choice to shop at Black Ovis, you're supporting a company that's involved in and gives back to the hunting community. It's where I do all my gear shopping, and whether you're just looking to replace a few items or build out a brand new kit, Black Ovis is the one-stop shop for super solid hunting gear. Additionally, you can help support Living Country in the City by doing all your gear shopping at Black Ovis.
Visit livingcountryinthecity.com/blackovis, bookmark the link, and use it whenever you do your shopping.
And we're back. One of the things, you guys were talking about just was really finding a time to have that conversation where I think you said where emotions aren't high and defenses aren't up. And it's so very important I think on both sides of the aisle. Finding a time to have these conversations about hunting when the person you're speaking to, when they're not all riled up, when they're not angry and emotional. But I think it's important for us to remember that we need to find a time to have these conversations when we're not irritable and emotional. And because I know there have been times where I've gotten messages on Instagram or I've had people confront me in one way or the other, and my initial reaction is to tell them to F off and I'll do what I want. When normally I would, any other situation, depending on, how I was approached, I would sit down and have a conversation with them. And it's come to a point where when I'm able to have a rational, calm conversation with someone about hunting, regardless of how opposed they are, I've never had it result in a negative outcome. Like you said, it may not change their lifestyle, it may not change their mind, but at least they're walking away educated and typically with a greater understanding of the respect hunters have for wildlife and our wild places. And I just did a recent podcast with Rachel Carey, and we talked a lot about that. And I won't tell the story again for my poor listeners, but long story short, I had a conversation with a group from the UK that I ran into, and one of them was a vegan who absolutely hated using the term two birds with one stone, which I laugh because now there's a meme going around on Facebook about PETA trying to change all of those phrases. But, I sat down, had a conversation with them, and the result turned out to be them thanking me for helping them understand more what hunting is. And so I think what you said is critical. Finding the correct time to have those conversations is absolutely critical, because I really have never had an experience turn out negatively when I'm able to have that conversation. The only time it turns out negative is when you're on Instagram and somebody's calling you a murderer over a message, and you're snapping back saying, yeah, well, suck it, you MFer, and all of that good stuff.
My response to that is always, well, look in the dictionary and see what the term murder means. It is a human killing another human. So first of all, check your logic. But no, I think that, you make a really good point there. And, it's one of the things that we always like to talk about here is that, we're privileged to live in a day and age where we have the luxury of choosing a dietary lifestyle. And it's not just a diet anymore. It's now a lifestyle. So being vegan isn't just about the way you're eating. It's a whole lifestyle. It's a spiritual thing. It's a perception thing. It's the clothes you wear, and it's become like a club. And that's great, right? If that's what's good for your body and that's what you think is best for your health, do that. But don't put it on someone else. Just because you've chosen that doesn't mean that you're better than someone else. And I think and that's across the board. That's just general virtue and ethics as human beings, right? Judge not kind of situation. And I think that, are there people who are bad examples of hunters? Absolutely. But there's just as many, well, I don't want to say there's just as many. There are certainly bad examples of people who are vegans that are just aggressive and, just are looking for fights, and they're picking fights on purpose. And so we're trying to remove ourselves from that whole atmosphere and try to have conversations on an even keeled level that accomplish what you were talking about, where there's education, where there was previously misinformation. We're trying to bridge a gap between, opposing lifestyles, or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of times we have found that people who might call themselves animal rights activists, there is a lot more in common with someone like that and a dedicated traditional hunter than you might think, because that is centered and revolves around a love and respect for wildlife. And sure, it's a difficult pill for an animal lover to swallow, that you could kill something that you love. But when you look at it in the larger context of wildlife management and the fact that we as humans have completely screwed up the natural order of things, we are now required to help manage that. And as urban cities expand and as populations expand, wild places diminish and wildlife corridors diminish. And so we only have a certain amount of these places and wildlife left. And that is a resource that has to be managed. And so in that sense, a regulated system of population census and issuing a specific number of tags to determine a conservation ratio. And then there is the aspect of the food, right? In my opinion, if you're going to kill something, you should be eating it. And if you're not going to eat it, you need to find someone else who's interested in eating it, because I'm not okay with that either. And just killing for the fact or the fun of it is, in my opinion, unethical. However, there are situations where they do have to do massive culls in different parts of the world where there is a extreme overpopulation of a specific species, and it's affecting the ecosystem, and it's killing grass species, and other species are suffering because of that. There's situations where they do have to mass cull animals. Ideally, they have a system in place where that meat is going to people who need or want it. But that whole system of, education, explaining how it works, so that if you wanted to participate in that system, you could. If you don't, that's great. But let's be diplomatic and respectful and agree to disagree instead of picking up rocks and pitchforks and, starting a riot.
One of the interesting things I've heard, is, you talk about how much someone, say an animal rights activist, has in common with a hunter. And one of the ways I heard it phrased, and I think I said it a few times on the podcast, that I always thought was a very good way to look at it, is we do have that in common, but it's the broadness of how we look at things that is where we differ. Wherein we're both groups are incredibly passionate about animals, whereas hunters, you would say, are more passionate about a species and the health and thriving of that species and the whole ecosystem in more of a broad fashion, versus an animal rights activist or a vegan or whoever that may be. They look at that one single animal and they're very directly passionate about that exact animal. That fox that is sitting out on the fence, that particular deer, that one single, they're passionate about each and every single one of those. And I think, there's nothing wrong about either of those views. And, they're just slightly different focus. And I think if we could get past our specific focus and see where that other person's coming from, the conversations can get a lot more productive.
Yeah, and it's also something that I would hope is that people realize that those are wild animals and they have savage natures, and they will kill and eat the first thing that crosses their path if they're hungry. And I think that we've done a lot of animals a disservice by personifying them or characterizing them, giving them names or making them into cartoon characters and making them more human-like than they are. Do they have personalities and intelligence? Absolutely. But they're wild animals. And I think for us, sure, we call ourselves a civilized species, but at the end of the day, we are also wild animals. And sure, we've developed some modern behaviors and fancy, in some ways silly ways of dressing, but removing yourself from the natural order is a mistake, in my opinion. And if you choose to do that and you decide to live a lifestyle that's no longer in connection with the natural world, that's fine. But it's reckless and ignorant to think that that world doesn't still exist and that there aren't still dangers or there aren't still instincts and wild, behaviors that will happen. And I think that's why a lot of people get gored by buffalo or bison in Yellowstone and grizzly bear attacks, or that's why every year in the Serengeti, some tourist gets eaten by a lion, because they think that those animals are tame, and they're not moving, and we're getting close to them with the Land Cruiser so I can get out and take photos. Yeah, well, guess what? Snack time for Simba. And so I think that that's a major problem. And so even if you do love animals and you think that they are these reverent creatures, and they are, you need to respect the fact that they're still part of a wild natural order, and that needs to stay as much as it can, wild.
Well, people have this fantasy world they live in where, bears live in happy nuclear families, and the boars don't go eat the cubs, and that when animals die in nature, they go climb to the top of a mountain and lay down in a field of clover while every species of wildlife comes and pays their respects. And we've watched too many Disney movies where squirrels come in and sit on your shoulder and make you dresses. It's this fantasy world people live in, and it's bears are not happy nuclear families, squirrels don't make dresses, and animals in the wild die in nasty, horrible ways. Like, there is not a nice way to die in the wild. Most animals do not die of old age. Sorry if this is coming as a surprise to anyone. I apologize for breaking your heart about this, but I think go for it.
I was going to say, I think too, the conversation typically gets really hasty by this point if you're a vegan, because as vegans, naturally you're going to also present your side of the case, right? And what we're talking about right now is assumptions made by us as humans over a historical time period, right? We're saying that animals are a lesser species because we don't have a way to communicate with them, and vegans would make that point. You're not an animal, so you don't know what it's like, right? And they would make a different case. This is where most conversations in this industry get really, really hasty, and we intentionally want to stay out of that particular conversation in the light of there is not a lot of production that comes from this with two very opposed parties. But the party that can digest this in a much different way is a party who's carnivorous. Mm-hmm. Somebody who goes to the grocery store and they buy their steak and they eat bacon and they eat eggs and they do all those things, and they don't like hunters. They think hunters are just ridiculous and that's silly. And where we have to shatter that paradigm is in the theology that the way that animals in a factory farm, industrial meat setting, that they are somehow raised and killed ethically. We have to get out of that paradigm, because I think we've all seen enough documentaries and we've read enough statistics to understand that factory farming is not the answer. Not for human sustainability, not for animal sustainability. And if we continue living with blinders on, thinking that it is, and thinking that that's the ethical choice, because somehow societally we've come to the agreement that the way that you buy meat off of a butcher shelf is the same way that you buy a bag of chips in the aisle. It's the same emotional stimulation that you get. And you don't see beef as cow, you don't see pork as pig, you see it as consumable product that didn't have to die at some point, that didn't have to get plugged in the head, and be bled out. And that's a really harsh reality. And it's really cool to see organizations who are trying to take an initiative to make a deeper connection between people who aren't necessarily hunters or don't really want to be associated with hunters, but want to have a deeper understanding of where their food comes from. I just went to Rome Ranch here in Texas. That was Rome Ranch is owned by Taylor. Taylor, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on your last name.
Collins.
Taylor and Katie Collins, thank you. Who is the founder of Epic Bar, and they just recently purchased a ranch in the Hill Country in Texas, and they are taking the best approach to regenerative ranching. Everything from crops and crop management to wildlife. And then they're inviting people who have never really had an experience with hunting or never had an experience with putting their hands on their food before it's killed, and then being privy to the process of killing an animal and bleeding it out. And they just had a turkey harvest at their ranch, and we were invited to go be a part of it, and to be able to watch so many people who, for Thanksgiving, they're just given their turkey and they eat it, and then they eat their stuffing, and it's the exact same emotional experience that they have. But to witness these people have to go, wait a minute, that's a living turkey, and I'm gonna have to kill that if I want Thanksgiving, and I'm gonna have to watch it when it's dying. I have to watch its body convulse, and I'm gonna have to experience this and know that what I did, I have to take ownership of that. And as a meat eater, if you don't have the responsibility and the weight of knowing what you've done to get the reward that you receive, there's so much that's missed. And that's one of the areas that we really want to lean into is, if you're a meat eater, or if you are not a vegetarian or vegan, and you perceive hunters to be somewhat demonstrative and off-putting, I think there needs to be some sort of a paradigm shift where you can experience what it's like to take the life of an animal that you're about to consume and have a relationship with it in the degree of being able to see it alive, see it killed, and then have to prepare it and process it yourself. There's something that happens that you will never get by unwrapping plastic off of styrofoam and laying it on a skillet.
I've said it probably a million times on the podcast where I think so many issues that people have around our diets and what we consume, whether it's waste or obesity or whatever it is, so many of them I feel like would be solved if more people had to harvest and process their own meat. I mean, I just even look at myself, and I've always done my best to have a respect for what I eat, and but I look at it now, and I look at the difference versus a pound or two of ground hamburger, how I treat that versus a pound or two of ground venison from a deer I've taken. I can't tell you how many packages of hamburger I've left too long in the fridge, and because I don't get around to cooking it or whatever, and I just and I toss it out. Versus just a quarter of that of my ground venison from my deer, I practically agonize over how I'm going to use that and cook it, because it needs to be perfect, because it's so important to me. And then, if I don't eat that entire thing in that first meal, I'll tell you what, it does not go bad in the fridge. It definitely gets used that next day or within the next couple of days. All of it gets eaten, all of it gets consumed, and I think so many of people's problems, like I said, with our diets, even aside from the respect aspect, would be solved if people had to actually take responsibility for what they're consuming.
Yep, absolutely.
So I wanted to talk just a little bit more about the magazine itself. We've touched on it a little bit, but what, say somebody hasn't picked up volume 1, or maybe they're looking to get, as we're recording this, it's before Christmas. I know you guys have a lot of deal. You kind of got a deal going on the 2 edition package, but say somebody's about to pick this up. What kind of stories can they expect to see in Modern Huntsman?
Sure. So volume 1 we kind of intentionally, we didn't have a specific theme. I mean, I think the theme we chose was a new narrative, meaning volume 1, we wanted it to be introductory in tone, kind of showcase the type of people that we were including who we feel are the best possible representatives of, an ethical hunting practice or an ethical hunting lifestyle, both men and women. Increasingly the topics and stories are going to be international. A lot of it was American West based, but people who, these are generational hunters. They were taught by their grandfather or their grandmother. They're hunting for their own food. They're teaching their kid how to do it, what they've learned. And I think the difference between a lot of the stories that we showcase versus what you might have seen in previous hunting publications would be that ours is much more focused on what happens to you on that journey, the path of the actual hunt versus what you killed or what, the end result is. And so I think that, that becomes a little more of a reverie in a Aldo Leopold or Henry Thoreau kind of Walden Pond essence, where you're reflecting upon your relationship with the nature and the wildlife and what's that teaching you, and what are you learning from the wind and the tracks and the different those kinds of things. And so I think with that it's presenting these stories in a different narrative with a different conclusion, in a visual format that up to this point, in my opinion, no other hunting publication had been doing it this way. And that's a different part of our goal. I mean, Katie very much is trying to win design awards with this book. And then with volume 2, we wanted to be a little more specific about public lands, with the common theme of it doesn't matter if you're a rock climber or a skier or an angler or a bird hunter, that we can all come together under common cause that public land is an important resource that should be protected and maintained. And instead of squabbling over the differences in a recreation that we choose. And there's other parts of the world where you don't have the luxury of choosing a recreation. In Tajikistan, you don't get to choose if you're going to be a backcountry skier or a fly fisherman. And you're certainly don't have the luxury to argue with someone about which one's better and who should be able to use the land. And so kind of trying to do a reality check there and presenting situations where people are of that mindset, sort of a collaborative effort. And so I think, one of the best representatives of that would be Chris Burkhardt, who is a very accomplished, well-known outdoor photographer who's not a hunter. And, I believe he's a vegan, and he, shoots a lot for Patagonia and the REI type, clients. And he agreed to be a part of our issue. And not only that, but his image is on the cover of the book. And it's just a testament to the fact that people do believe that public land is more important as a concept than whether, whichever lifestyle, recreation pursuit you choose. And then we kind of talked about what is it like when public and private intersect, and situations where private landowners are working in conjunction with conservation organizations or government agencies to increase wildlife corridors or to allow wildlife management on their property and that kind of stuff. And then the third section of volume 2 was about international case studies. What is it like in other parts of the world? What was it like in Scotland? What is it like in New Zealand or Africa or Argentina? Because it's very different from the United States. And so we were hoping that through comparing those situations, you can kind of learn some pros and some cons and what's good and what's bad and what could be better. But at the end of the day, we have it pretty damn good in the United States. And are the majority of our public lands under threat? Not necessarily, but that doesn't mean that they could be at some point, because once something goes private, it's unlikely that it'll ever go back to public, and that we as Americans own this. This is part of our wealth of inheritance as citizens of this country, and it's millions and millions and millions of acres of public land, and a lot of it is in the West, but people don't know that that's theirs and that they have access to it and can go recreate whenever they want. And so trying to showcase these stories in a new light, but then also with an educational angle. And then if they want to learn more, we were providing some resources about where they can go to learn, whether that's about public land or that's about hunting in your state or that's about, anything within that realm. We're just trying to be a resource for that, in addition to the sort of mediators or moderators of a constructive, progressive conversation about what are otherwise very heated topics.
Sorry, I keep doing this lately. I'm enjoying my guests so much that I'm just sitting listening to you talk and kind of taking it in as if I'm the one listening to the podcast and not hosting it. I was like sitting there, I'm like, man, this is good. Like it's weird, man. That's the bad part about being such a big fan and running the podcast at the same time. Okay. Well, so if people wanted to,
thank you for that, by the way.
Oh
yeah,
that's really cool to hear. It is.
No, it's like it's kind of been tough with this podcast because we'll get going and there's been I'd say out of the 90, there's been a handful, maybe about 10, where I keep losing myself and I'm like, gosh, I gotta stay on top of this stuff. So you guys are definitely up there with Jim Shockey on how much I'm enjoying being on the podcast.
Nice. I used to work for Jim back in the day when I was a young cameraman.
All right. So if people wanted to find you guys, find Modern Huntsman, follow along on all the good stuff you guys are putting out, where are they looking?
Sure. So you can check out modernhuntsman.com. Anywhere you go on the website, you'll be able to purchase an issue of Volume 1 or Volume 2, or we have our bundles of Volume 1 and Volume 2 available for sale for a little bit of a discount. You can also subscribe from our website to receive the issues as they're released right now every 6 months. And then on social media, we're definitely involved on Instagram, so you can check it out at Modern Huntsman, and it's MAN singular.
And if do y'all have your own individual Instagrams that people can follow also if they want to see all the good stuff?
Yeah. So mine is just at Brad Neathery. It's Neathery.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then mine is at Tyler Sharp Photo. So it's Tyler and then Sharp SHARP, no E, photo.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure to link to these on the show notes page. That'll be livingcountryinthecity.com/90 for episode 90. As we're kind of winding down here, we talked before the podcast a little bit just about this podcast is really, I like to focus it on new hunters and people that may not have the traditional hunting background or feel like they don't have the resources to get into hunting. And I know to some extent, that's a bit of a passion for you guys as well. So if somebody came up to you, or reached out to you and said, hey, I've been seeing what you guys have been putting out. This looks incredible. I want to be part of this. I want to get into the outdoors. I want to start hunting, but I don't know. I'm a little intimidated. I don't have any background in this. What advice or words of wisdom would you guys give to them?
I mean, I'd probably try to connect them with someone in their area because, I wrote something in Volume 1 at the very end. I think it was a few parting words that basically said, if you decide, there's a lot of people, we had an address to non-hunters that, we appreciate, your willingness to listen to a new perspective on this, and that should there come a day where you decide that you do want to pick up a shotgun or a bow and learn how to hunt, where previously you might have thought you would find opposition, you would actually find an incredibly supportive community that's been around for millennia. And so I think that a lot of people would jump at the opportunity to educate or take someone hunting for the first time. That's kind of an honor to be able to help someone with that. So, I think that we could certainly try to be a resource for that. And I can, say firsthand how intimidating it could be to walk into a local sporting goods store, or if you have no idea how to get a turkey license or a waterfowl license, because it can be kind of a boys club judgmental environment. And so we're trying to provide access to that. So there are resources, a lot of brands. Sitka Gear is really good about offering up educational resources for when the right time is to sign up for certain tags and how that works. But usually the fish and wildlife organizations for states are a great resource. You can call their office or show up and ask them. Texas Parks and Wildlife is an incredible organization that is actively trying to recruit new hunters, people who are interested in doing it. They will pair you, with a game warden, or they'll, kind of teach you firsthand how to do it. They have different classes and educational resources. But I would say that you just gotta own it. You gotta walk in there knowing that you're new to this, and don't try to act like you know what you're doing, because it is something that requires some education and a little bit of training, especially if you don't have experience with firearms. But I think that the willingness to learn and the enthusiasm about wanting to pursue that lifestyle is something that I would say, the majority of hunters would be honored to help, bring about.
That's awesome. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time. I know things are going to be getting pretty busy for y'all coming up again, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to hop on and share with our listeners. I will, like I said, make sure to link to all of this, send people over your way on the show notes page. But any final thoughts before we sign off?
Man, appreciate you and taking the time to talk to us. It means the world.
Awesome.
All right, y'all, that'll do it for episode 90 of Living Country in the City. Make sure you check out the show notes page at livingcountryinthecity.com/90. Check out links to everything we talked about in today's episode. Make sure y'all check out Modern Huntsman online. Sign up to receive those publications. And in the meantime, keep it country, y'all.
Thank y'all for listening to Living Country in the City. Get show notes and check out the blog, product reviews, events, and more at livingcountryinthecity.com.